What if you were just living your best life, swimming in the ocean or cruising on a ship, when suddenly the world beyond became a world within? The sea itself seemed to rise up and consume everything, leaving you in a dark hell of biological destruction and digestion. On this episode of Goji Center, we dive into the depths with all of our best, let's just say, in-depth equipment to see what horrid fates befall those consumed by the ocean's greatest apex of apex predators. Today, we'll find out what happens if you get swallowed by the bloop. First, let's break down what would have happened in a lot of those videos that are the bane of thalassophobes. What if, for whatever reason, something this ungodly huge decided to go out of its way to target and consume humans? Either a lone diver in the water, or some nightmarish scenario of the bloop upstaging the movie Megs and swimming past a beach to scarf down a whole group of people. What kind of grisly fate can we expect for someone who goes down the hatch? Well, in today's science lesson, we'll look at some real-world biology that might give us some information. First off, put any ancient movie cliches out of your mind. Unless you got swallowed with a mecha suit and a lightsaber, you are not cutting yourself out. Soft tissue like those on the insides of animals aren't always soft. The walls of things like the throat and stomach are muscular, flexible, and thick. After all, we squishy humans are supposed to be able to scarf down hundreds of times our own body weight worth of food every year of our lives. If we got sliced up by every loose piece of sharp or stiff material that went down our throats, we'd have cut ourselves to bits ages ago. We ain't giving any of those poor suckers going down Bloop's throat any plot armor. Which Bloop? Well, numerous canons of sorts exist for the bloop. However, there are some commonalities that might tell us what's going on inside. After all, this whole modern myth was started from what was a loud ice quake mistaken for an animal call similar to a whale. Only the whale would have been an order of magnitude larger than any known species. The popular image of the bloop also does have a whale-like body, and some of the most popular videos about it, such as those by Borisau Blois, featuring a colossal showdown with El Gran Maha, do call this large leviathan a cetacean. Cetaceans, named after the Greek sea monster Cetus, are the groups all modern and extinct whales and dolphins belong to. While it is reasonably well known that whales evolved from land-dwelling mammals, the taxonomic family of mammals they belong to is the relevant part here for our unfortunate bloop victims. So, to start off, despite whales living in the ocean, they drink very little salt water. Their digestive system is specially attuned to absorb the water from the tissues of their prey. This also means that whenever they take a massive gulp, all that seawater that wound up inside their mouth has to go somewhere. And with the bloop sporting a row of slicing teeth lining its massive jaws, it might employ a method seen in other marine mammals: filter feeding. Alright, before we proceed, we'd like to play a little game with you guys. Here are 2 test subjects, and your task will be to choose which test subject you want to be, and try to guess which of these is going to go out in the quickest and least painful manner. You can pick A, the dude in a swimsuit, or B, dude in a sci-fi temperature-resistant suit providing some protection. You picked one yet? Alright, good, let's proceed. So, filter feeding, right? For something like a humpback whale, this means filtering out tasty plankton from thousands of gallons of seawater. For something like the bloop, this now means filtering out potentially hundreds of beachgoers or boaters from millions of gallons of seawater. After taking a big gulp, the throat muscles and tongue contract and push forward. All of that water taken in with its victims is rapidly shot out from the mouth. In filter-feeding whales, this means the water is run out across hair like baleen. But instead, our pool of poor victims would suffer the same fate of small fish and crustaceans swallowed by creatures like crab-eating seals. They get filtered out from between clenched teeth. Given the sheer size of the bloop, any people caught up inside the mouth would suffer one of 2 fates. Number 1, either they are caught against the teeth and kept inside the mouth to be swallowed, or the sheer water pressure practically fires them through the gaps between the sharp teeth. That much pressure pushing that much water weight into a victim with small gaps behind them could easily break their bodies apart and tear them limb from limb as they are violently ejected out. Body parts would be torn off, necks and spines would be snapped or shredded, and a bloody pulp might wind up floating off into the water. And those might have been the lucky ones. After all, at least they went out quickly. The rest go further down the hatch. Quick parenthesis here, you may have noticed we used a smaller, more juvenile version to showcase this tour. That's because if we use a huge bloop, you wouldn't be able to see the people clearly. So, to provide an optimal learning experience, we'll continue using a small, juvenile bloop. Now let's just assume that the physics already bent to let a thing like this exist is going to continue to be bent. Otherwise, a hot-blooded mammal this size with this much insulating tissue would be heating up on the inside like a furnace. So, if we don't assume the temperature is pushed back down to normal levels for something like a blue whale, the insides of the bloop might become hot enough to boil you alive on the way down. Congratulations! Those of you wearing a suit didn't end up as steaming soup. Now you get to go out in an even worse way because there isn't just one stomach. Why? So, despite their looks and carnivorous ancestors, whales are actually part of the Artiodactyla even-toed hooved animal family. Just stay with us. This will make a lot of sense in a bit. While most members of this group today are herbivores such as deer, hippos, and cattle, with a few omnivores like pigs, in the ancient past, some of this group were among the largest land predators to ever exist in the aftermath of the dinosaur extinction. And one common trait found across most members, whales included, is that these creatures have multiple stomach chambers. The same mechanism that helps a cow break down tough grass helps whales process hard-shelled crustaceans like krill. And unfortunately, in our scenario, some not-so-hard-shelled people. Entering the first chamber, the forestomach compartment, doesn't mean a direct dunking into the stomach acid yet. Keyword being yet. But abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Instead, this compartment is full of digestive microbes that help in breaking down certain keratinous structures. For our unfortunate bloop victims, this means nails, hair, and skin start breaking down, softening, and sloughing off after they are covered in vats of pre-digestive enzymes and microbes. Someone would have to survive asphyxiating to death from all the gases produced by these microbes, replacing a lot of the oxygen with toxic levels of carbon dioxide and methane. If they did by being lucky, or rather unlucky enough to be wearing something like a scuba tank to breathe from, they might have wished they went out the other way. The forestomach in some species of whales isn't just a fermentation chamber, but a heavily muscular organ that helps to separate out the edible from the inedible. And it sometimes does this with brute force. Despite their huge size, whales can have surprisingly compact innards. Even scaled up to the size of the bloop, the opening to the next chambers of the stomach are substantially smaller than the forechamber. So things need to get broken down before they continue on. For our unfortunate bloop victims, this also means that almost anything inedible or unpalatable that the bloop has swallowed, intentional or otherwise, is kept inside the forechamber. And when the muscular walls start contracting and flexing, all of those inedibles are going to be sent crashing into them. There would be no time to get your bearings or try to escape. Within moments of arriving, you would find yourself with thousands of pounds of broken bones, squid beaks, rocks, and other swallowed objects falling on you like an avalanche, as parts of your body are sloughing off. In effect, some whales chew with their stomach, and this whale of a whale is no different. Ground and crushed into a pulp, the edible meat floats to the surface as what is left of you joins the grinding remains. Some of one victim's bones might wind up helping crush a future victim. The rest is shuffled into the main digestive stomach chambers to be further broken down and consumed. Anything that remains would be spat up eventually to litter the seafloor with whatever is left. At this point, there wouldn't be a point to covering the rest of the digestive journey. Even if a victim somehow survived the violent journey through the mouth, somehow had their own oxygen supply, and somehow was inside something sturdy enough to avoid being crushed to death, getting dunked into thousands of gallons of digestive acid would be curtains for anybody. Dead men tell no tales in the sea, and the victims of the bloop suffered probably one of the most horrific of all fates, depending on what step they perished in. Alternatively, the bloop might have the ability to produce its own kind of wax, similar to what sperm whales do. This wax, called ambergris, coats material that gets stuck in the forestomach and helps it get back up when the whale needs to hit the purge valve. This wax can sometimes wind up on beaches, at first smelling like straight-up feces, but after it ages, it has a distinct aroma that sometimes ends up being used in some high-end perfumes. So, some vacationer or fisherman could perhaps discover a human skull embedded within the waxy capsule as all that would remain of you. And in this alternate universe, don't be surprised if the victims of this giant cetacean end up in a perfume bottle. That would be the fate of anyone consumed by the internet's favorite marine urban legend. But what about those unfortunate enough to meet our bioaccurate version in the open ocean while it has an appetite? Unlike the urban legend version popular on the web, Cryocidon setavenator is not a whale, but a hunter of whales. This gigantic beast doesn't look like a monstrous axolotl for no reason, as it is actually a type of marine amphibian from a bygone era. So how might a not-so-fantastic voyage down the hatch of the sinister salamander play out? Time to find out. Just like the urban legend version, our setavenator will also engulf its prey rather than chew it up. While Cryocidon does prefer to hunt whales for a far more substantial meal, it does filter feed smaller prey from time to time. With its enormous lifespan and lengthy periods of inactivity, any food will do. So, be it a young one trying to top itself off, or an older one that can catch multiple victims at once, humans could wind up on the menu by accident or intention. This amphibian employs what is called suction feeding. This involves rapidly expanding the carnivorous mouth and shifting the internals down the throat to create a vacuum wave effect. The sudden change in water pressure violently draws prey along with a vast amount of seawater into the open cavity of the mouth. This much water moving back quickly so suddenly is going to create horrific pressure waves. Blood vessels in the eyes could burst and eardrums would almost certainly pop, potentially blinding and deafening victims even before they go down the hatch. Just like in whales, aquatic amphibians that swallow too much water try to eject as much of that out as they can to filter out the food they want. They just do it in a slightly different way. A sticky tongue helps in both pushing the water out from between the teeth, as well as capturing more victims. Coated in viscous mucus, anybody still alive would be quickly immobilized and sent sliding down the throat. Amphibians typically don't have multiple stomach chambers like whales do, but they do have other pre-digestive assets to help the food be processed even before it hits the major guts. One of these would be the esophagus, which in amphibians secretes sticky enzymes called chitinase. These serve a similar function to the forestomach agents in whales, weakening and corroding parts of the body to make them softer and easier to digest. Paralyzed, blind, probably deafened, and coated in enzymes, the next fate of Cryocidon victims might just be one of the most horrific of all, depending on how active the amphibian is. Because Cryocidon is an amphibian, not a mammal, it's capable of what is called mesothermy. Mammals, which are always active and hot-blooded as endotherms, or inner heat, meaning their body naturally produces its own heat by burning calories for energy, most amphibians are ectotherms, or outer heat. They rely on outside temperatures for most of their body regulation. Mesothermy is the in-between of these states. In these kinds of animals, often localized parts of the body can be manually heated up to increase activity or speed up digestion. Great white sharks are one such example in the ocean. As talked about by YouTube science education Facts in Motion, these sharks insulated muscle movements and have a unique circulatory system to keep their core body temperature nice and toasty by powering it with heat from sources like their swimming muscles. This helps with both swimming stamina, activity levels, and digestion, as a warmer body digests food faster. So, if Cryocidon was up and active, its internal stomach would be heated like a furnace. This is actually the least worst outcome for anyone who survives the trip to the stomach cavity. At least it means the stomach was producing plenty of acid to break down their body very quickly so that they can be digested. It would only take maybe a few minutes. But if the Titanic tadpole decided to take a nap, however, that's where it arguably gets even worse. When amphibians decide it is time to rest, they have a remarkable ability to shut off and render some parts of their body dormant to save energy. So, if the Cryocidon had already eaten well and had plenty of nutrients already broken down further along in the digestive system, by the time a human hits the stomach, the victim may land in a nearly vacant chamber. The amount of stomach acid would be lessened, the air and other gases would be pumped out, surroundings grow cold, and they would just be left there. Paralyzed, half-digested, possibly blind, and left to nearly rot as the living tomb that had consumed them decides to rest and hibernate. You would not want to be the leftovers for the god of the frozen seas. At that point, you might almost wish another titanic force, like a horned sea serpent from a bygone era, might arrive to challenge that whale-hunting god, both to keep either from consuming more, and perhaps speed up the fate of any condemned to its cavernous void.